Welcome, everyone. My name is Sydney Levin-Epstein, and as a member of the National Leadership Council of the Jewish Democratic Council of America, I want to thank you for joining us for today's program, Democratic Messaging: Meeting the Moment with Brian Tyler Cohen. As Senator Cory Booker said in his record-breaking Senate speech last week, these are not normal times in our nation, and they should not be treated as such. But what does this mean in practice? And how can Democrats ensure that the American people understand the urgency of this moment and join in taking action? Part of the answer to this question lies with effective communication, meeting people where they are, making them feel heard, and bringing them into movements like JDCA, which is advocating for policies consistent with our values and creating change at the ballot box. With a win in Wisconsin last week and Democrats' overperformance in Florida, we have the momentum. Now we have to sustain it and make sure the American people know exactly what Democrats are doing to fight back against the Trump administration. To help us understand the best practices to make this happen amidst the ever changing media landscape, I'm pleased to introduce today's guest, Brian Tyler Cohen. Brian is an accomplished commentator, podcaster, YouTuber, and MSNBC contributor. His weekly show, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, is one of the most viewed independent progressive podcasts, and his YouTube channel has more than 4 million subscribers. I think it's like almost to 5 last time I checked. Now, thank you so much for being here, Brian. I'm so happy to pass it over to JDCA CEO Halie Soifer to begin today's conversation. Halie, take it away.
Thank you, Sydney. And we want to thank all of our new leadership council members around the country who have joined this organization and this movement for change. Brian, thanks for joining us. We are thrilled to have you today. We're going to start with really just getting to the crux of it, the importance of communication in politics. What lessons do you think Democrats should draw from the 2024 election, and how can we do better communicating? And also, what are the most effective ways of reaching those segments of the electorate where we may have lost ground in November, including and perhaps especially among younger people?
Well, that's a great question. First off, I want to say thank you to you, Haley, and the entire team at JDCA, and everybody who's watching. I will repeat this to the ends of the earth, but the fact that people are staying engaged and activated, like you all who are tuning in for this right now, that is why we will win moving forward. Especially to do so at a time where there is a lot to be concerned about, a lot to be worried about. The fact that people are still against all odds, staying engaged, staying activated, and staying informed is, again, why we will win. Okay, so in terms of what we can do to help ourselves moving forward, I think first and foremost, we have to recognize the asymmetry of the media environment that we're in and take steps to correct it. And so and this is a drum that I've beaten for a long, long time, and that is that while Republicans have really embraced digital media, have embraced their content creators, there's no doubt about the effectiveness of people like Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire and Dan Bongino, Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Alex Jones. They've bolstered all of their independent media creators. And the reality is that the vast majority of Americans get their news online, and the vast majority of persuadable voters get their news online. And yet, all the while, the Democrats have kind of rested on our laurels, recognizing that, okay, well, we've got, MSNBC and CNN and the New York Times as our message distribution system. And so there's no reason for us to invest in a partisan, a progressive, a democratic media ecosystem. And so that created this asymmetry where the Democrats were relying on legacy media, which is going to be hostile to Democrats and Republicans, as is their job. But you have a Republican messaging distribution system that is overtly Republican. And so that therein lies the asymmetry, where we have nobody advocating for democratic values. And what that left us with was kind of this just giant gap in terms of how people perceived the Democratic Party, because really the narrative was being driven by overtly partisan Republican officials. And so our goal has to be to embrace independent media so that we're reaching people where they're consuming news, and most importantly, reaching persuadable people where they're getting their news. I know that it's easy for us to want to send our elected officials onto MSNBC because that's where they're going to reach a liberal audience, and they'll get claps and pets for what they say. But the reality is that if we're just going after the MSNBC crowd, we're bringing sand to the beach. We have to reach people where they are, and we have to reach the persuadable voters where they are. And if they're not watching MSNBC, we have to figure out where they are. And so I've in the last few months, I've been fortunate enough to be invited to DC to address the Democratic caucus in the House and the Senate and speak with them about the importance of kind of embracing these new media ecosystems and how to optimize on those ecosystems. And they get it, and they understand. Unfortunately, it took us getting pretty badly beaten in this last election for them to recognize that there's a problem. But the silver lining is that they recognize that there's a problem. And for an institution that is about as nimble as a cruise ship, it's a big move for them to see that we have to change the way we've done things. So really, the very short, after a very long answer to your question, the short answer to the question is to really invest in these digital media infrastructure, make sure that we're putting content on TikTok and Instagram, on Facebook and YouTube, wherever we can reach the most people. But it is more important to actually reach people where they are, as opposed to just going on these safe outlets where we've become accustomed to going, but we're not going to really reach the people that we need to reach to be able to broaden our coalition.
So now on to the issues. So Democrats, you gave us some lessons about what to do, and now we can all see kind of how it's done, because nobody summarized these issues better than you. So let's start with tariffs. The average household consumer has lost, or it's projected to lose, almost $4,000 due to these tariffs. And of course, that it could increase. And there are trillions in projected losses in our economy due to Trump's tariffs. It has been a devastating few days, with Trump infusing the economy with volatility and uncertainty and potentially putting us on a path to recession.
Yeah.
What do you think is actually driving Trump's motivation and indignation around these tariffs? And how can Democrats effectively message that it is Trump who is hurting so many Americans, including his supporters, with his economic policy?
Well, it is Trump who's driving all of this, and it is Trump who's hurting all of his supporters, and that's why we've seen everybody from Dave Portnoy to Ben Shapiro to several Republican senators come out in recent days. Bill Ackman among them, coming out in the last couple of days and trying to gently have him change direction. Here's what I think is driving his decision to do this. Trump is driven by ego. This guy went to the Roy Cohn School of Management. He thinks that any capitulation, any acknowledgement of that you've done something wrong is a sign of weakness. And so once you've planted your flag, once he's decided that, okay, we're getting ripped off because of trade imbalances, once he's planted his flag and said that, now he has to barrel ahead and see this thing through to the end. Because again, if he decides to change course, he views that as capitulation, which he views as weakness, and you can never do that. You can never admit fault. You can never accept responsibility. You just have to barrel ahead with blinders on. Now, he's got this mistaken notion that a trade imbalance is a bad thing. A trade imbalance is not a bad thing. It just means that we import more than a foreign country imports from us. It may mean, for example, if you look at Madagascar, one of the poorest countries in the world, but they produce 80% of the world's vanilla. We need vanilla, and so we import from them. The notion that one of the poorest countries in the world is not importing a commensurate amount that we do into their own country shouldn't surprise anybody. And yet Donald Trump has decided that every country has to have a trade balance. And if we don't, then he's going to impose tariffs. And so now on Madagascar, they'll have 47% tariffs. Doesn't mean that they're going to be wealthy enough overnight to be able to import, as much as we import from them. And so the only difference here is now they'll have 47% tariffs. Tariffs are a tax not on the exporting country, but on the importing company. And that company, whatever company imports it into the United States, is going to pass that tax on to consumers. That means that we are all going to pay 47% more for any products that contain vanilla because Donald Trump decided to try and punish a different country. And so it's completely backwards on its head. It's based on a complete fallacy, but Donald Trump's just had it in his brain that this is how it goes, and so now we have to just watch the entire global economy collapse as the result of that. And I think the reality is that showing the fact that we've got people like Ben Shapiro and Dave Portnoy and Tom Tillis and Bill Ackman, this broad swath of outspoken Republicans who are coming forward and saying that this is a crazy idea, should go to show that this lies unilaterally on, in the lap of Donald Trump, all because his ego is too fragile for him to ever be able to admit fault. But really, I mean, there's no reason other than that. Other than a more insidious interpretation of this is that Donald Trump will impose these tariffs, and aside from his mistaken notion about how they actually work, he'll want people to come to basically petition the king, to grovel and say, okay, we want to lift these tariffs, and so what do you need from us? What can we do for you? And this way he can get something from somebody. And we've seen that strategy play itself out with the law firms. He'll impose blanket punishments in the form of these executive orders on these law firms. And for those to be lifted, well, now you've got to give $100 million in pro bono legal services to Trump, and a little bit of a nod that you're probably not going to litigate against him moving forward. Did the same thing to the tech billionaires. Now all of a sudden we've got Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos changing their content moderation policies so that things will be a little bit more favorable to Trump and Republicans. We've seen it in the news outlets where ABC News settled a frivolous lawsuit for $15 million. CBS is likely going to do the same for a lawsuit for 60 Minutes, defamation lawsuit for 60 Minutes. And so Trump knows that if he can punish people in advance, that he can get them to crawl to him, offering something to him that will benefit him personally, financially, politically, and he can kind of own them in that way. And so the sad part about that, aside from the fact that it is authoritarian behavior, is that while all the pain is being endured, it's us who are the collateral, the collateral damage. So Trump will, he'll derive some benefit, but not until we've seen all of this pain, all of this financial mayhem, spread across the country. And the reality is that if somebody needs to draw from their 401k now, it's going to be worth less. If somebody needs to take out a loan, if somebody needs to be able to afford groceries, those are the people who are going to be impacted, while Trump waits for to derive some financial or personal benefit for himself. So really, the long and short of this is that there is one person who this stands to benefit, and that's Donald Trump, and 350 million people are going to be the collateral damage while he's helping himself.
And I guess we're seeing Democrats make an effort to ensure that Republicans are held accountable, and that the public opinion, which appears to be shifting against Trump, is heard. We see town halls that Democrats are hosting in Republican-led districts. We've seen senators hold the floor, protesting nominations. But of course, last week we saw Senator Booker speak for over 25 hours. How do you see some Democrats kind of meeting the moment right now? And what lessons can others learn from them?
First of all, I think I took a flight this morning, and it was a 5-hour flight, 4.5-hour flight, and I might have gotten up 5 times. And so the notion that Cory Booker went 25 hours standing on that floor and not using the bathroom is like, I just want to like give a nod to him for doing that. Look, I think we can learn a lot from what Cory Booker did, and that is to recognize that we need to do something different to be able to break through in this media environment. It's not enough to just do, like, even if you have a great moment on the Senate floor or the House floor, and then you put it online and it gets a couple thousand or tens of thousands or even millions of views, and then it's forgotten by tomorrow and we all move on. The reality is that this is a very difficult media environment to break through, especially when you've got Donald Trump, setting the world on fire, and that garners a lot of the media coverage. And so I think what Cory Booker did was smart, because not only did he figure out a way that would actually garner some attention and break through, and it did break through. he also set the bar for the rest of his colleagues in the Senate and also for Democrats in the House to say, not necessarily how long are you going to stand up and filibuster, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do that's going to be able to break through? What is not just the bare minimum that you can do, but the absolute maximum that you can do? And if it's not standing up and talking for 25 hours, which I don't presume a lot of our people are going to be able to do, does that mean that you're going to be able to hold town halls in blue or, more importantly, red districts? Does it mean that you have to figure out a way to do what Brian Schatz is doing right now, which is to hold up 300 nominees and basically stop the Senate from functioning until we have some clarity on what Trump is trying to do? And so I think it kind of gave the Democrats in the Senate and the House a kick in the ass in terms of recognizing that it's not politics as usual, it's not business as usual, it's not just doing the bare minimum or, showing up with a bullhorn outside of some government agency that most people don't know. It's figuring out what you can do that's different, figuring out what you can do that will put in some cases, your body on the line, but certainly get your voice out there. And I think that we're starting to see people recognize that a little bit. Cory Booker, getting up on the Senate floor for that long, I think did set the standard for other Democrats to meet. And just yesterday I interviewed Brian Schatz about holding up 300 nominees. And so I do think that people are recognizing that we have to operate a little bit differently, recognize that it's not politics as usual, and figure out how to beat Republicans at their own game.
So on that note, I mean, there's no question that the rules of the game are changing a bit, right? It's been happening over time, but there's no question that there has been a shifting media landscape, including in the lead up to the 24 election, that we may have been a little slow to. Joe Rogan's interview with Donald Trump has over 57 million views.
Yeah.
And as we know, Kamala Harris didn't appear on Rogan. And so since the election, you've been encouraging Democrats to adapt to this changing media landscape and to build these online networks to reach voters. And as you just said to us, to change it up. So we're not just bringing sand to the beach.
Yeah.
What have you learned? Because you've actually done this. You, as Sydney said, have nearly 50 million viewers on YouTube. What have you learned from growing your base over time on social media, from your podcast to your YouTube? And by the way, everybody should be listening. That Democrats or even organizations like ours can learn from as we approach the next election?
So there's a few things. One, I think simplicity in messaging is going to help us. Al Franken has a joke about the Democratic Party where he says that Democrats slogans, if it was a bumper sticker, it would end with "continued on next bumper sticker." And so we can actually learn a lot from what Trump's strategy was, which is to keep it simple. I mean, he has these 3-word nursery rhymes that he just repeats ad nauseum until they get seared into everybody's cerebral cortexes. But we've heard "build the wall," we've heard "lock her up," we've heard "make America great again." And so he repeats them over and over and over, and they're simple to understand. And we, on the left, we have a tendency to be able to get very professorial. But I think there's a lot to be learned in terms of keeping our messaging very simple and repeating our messaging over and over. And I think that's a tough part. And it was difficult for me while I was doing my job on YouTube, because I feel like, okay, I've already said something once. I want to treat people like they're intelligent and not repeat the same thing, because they'll be like, yeah, no, I get it. But I think it's important that, even when you're buying a new product, they say that you need 5, 6, 7, 8 touches of something before something sticks in your head. Some marketing campaign sticks in your head, and you're like, oh, maybe I want to buy that product because I've seen it 5, 6, 7, 8 times by now. Political messaging is the same thing. Saying something one time is not going to have it stick for anybody, but being able to repeat it over and over and over again is. And then it also gives our audience a permission structure to be able to bring that message to their audience. And so for me, I don't treat my audience as if they're the end user, as if the message stops with them. I treat them as one more step in the process. So I'm constantly asking my audience to go and bring our message out to their circles of people, because I know that if somebody's watching my YouTube channel More likely than not, they're already bought in. I know that the people on this call right now, more likely than not, you're already bought in. You're high information voters. You understand the stakes in this election. And so the goal isn't necessarily just to hear what I'm saying, to hear what the team at JDCA is saying, to hear what Democrats in Congress are saying, and to say, okay, like I've got it, I've internalized that, it's over. It's to get that and treat yourself as an emissary for your circles of people who may not be so invested in politics. I mean, my own sister, like my whole life is consumed by politics. My own sister, I asked her in 2018, she lived in Florida at the time, and I asked her if she was voting for in the gubernatorial race, and she said, "What's that?" And I said, "It's for governor," and she said, "What's that?" So like, if somebody in my family has no idea what a governor is, then I know that everybody has these apolitical, nonpartisan, non-political people in their own families, and so the job here really has to be not just consuming political content yourself, but figuring out how to use that in a moment where we can then find the family members, find friends, find colleagues, neighbors, whoever it may be, and use your platform to speak to them. And it doesn't, I want to disabuse anybody of the notion that you need like 1 million followers on some social media platform to be able to have an impact. A story that I tell all the time is that in 2020, the difference between Biden's win and Trump's loss, what could have been Trump's win, was 2 votes per precinct in Wisconsin. So if Trump had flipped 2 voters per precinct in Wisconsin, he would have beat Joe Biden in 2020 in the tipping point state. And so it doesn't take a lot to be able to influence these elections, especially when they're happening in just a few states with very small margins. And it's going to be especially important in this upcoming election in midterms here. So that really is the main thing, is to view yourself not as the end user, but an emissary for the message more broadly.
Well, I'm glad you raised Wisconsin, because we had a big week last week in Wisconsin with an 11-point swing from November. So we're talking 5 months. And in that period of time, we went from a state that Trump won by 1 point to the first statewide race in Trump 2.0, and the Liberal candidate, Susan Crawford, who we supported and were proud to make 30,000 calls in support of, winning by 10 points.
Yeah.
What do you make of that election? And yes, we overperformed in 2 House races in Florida as well. What do you make of this shift that we're seeing in the electorate, where we have a few case studies, and how do we sustain that through the midterms?
We also had 2 Pennsylvania state legislative elections, and we were able to flip 1 seat red to blue, and in the other seat we were able to gain an outright majority in the state house there. So we've been overperforming in special elections across the country. There's not many of them. There's about a dozen, but we've been overperforming in them. What that tells me is that if this continues, if this momentum continues, if people continue to stay engaged and activated and involved in politics, then we are on track to see in midterms happen in midterms what happened in 2017. So in 2017, there was a bunch of special elections. Democrats had an average overperformance of 11 points from 2016. So immediate backlash to Donald Trump, and it was the same situation as we're in right now. He had the White House, Republicans had the House and the Senate. And we started seeing this backlash, and that culminated into Democrats winning the House by the biggest margin in modern American history. We flipped 41 seats in 2018 in the midterms, and we're seeing almost identical numbers right now. So the average swing right now in just the dozen or so special elections that we've had thus far is 10 points. So 1 point off from what we saw in 2017. And so that tells me that if we're able to keep this up, if we're able to keep the energy and enthusiasm up, then we are going to be headed for the exact same thing. And there's no more effective bulwark against the Trump administration than being able to flip at least one chamber in Congress. I think obviously the Senate is going to be a much heavier lift in 2026, but the House is absolutely gettable. So what that tells me is that we are on track to be able to see a similar situation play itself out. And by the way, even just anecdotally, I can look at the analytics on my YouTube channel, and I know that they always peak just before an election and they plummet, and then they build, the analytics build up again, viewership builds up as we get closer and closer to the election, and it's very constant and very cyclical. And so always in like September, October of an election year, every 2 years, I see that peak, and then it drops, and then it slowly builds up again until we have the next election. The viewership on my channel right now in April of an off year is double what it's been, it's double what it was in the last election cycle. So there is twice as much engagement now after the election, again in April of an off year, than I saw even in the lead up to the election, which tells me that people are paying attention, that the time for tuning out or licking our wounds is over, that there is an appetite to fight. And I think that not only does the electorate understand it, that Democrats in Congress and more broadly, that they understand it, and that we're seeing some like everybody kind of coalesce into this mindset where, okay, time to steel our spines, time to stand up, time to speak out, and time to fight back.
Right. And we're seeing increased engagement too, which we're thrilled to see. People are taking action. We've had tens of thousands of people join us for taking action. And so we'll post in the chat our latest way to take action with us, which is to write to your member of Congress to urge them to take back their authority over tariffs.
And please do it, by the way, to that exact point. Like, all of this stuff matters. They log calls, they log letters that they get, they hear all of this stuff, and it's difficult to ignore. And so if they see a groundswell of support for something, this has a really big impact.
Yes, looks like we've put 3 options for taking action in the chat. You can go ahead and do all 3. It requires just a few clicks. Okay, I'm going to start now by taking some questions that we received from JDCA members in advance. And the first one I think we can all relate to, because we Jews, we have 2, maybe more opportunities like this a year. People think of, difficult conversations at the Thanksgiving table, but we're about to go into Passover Seder. So the first question is, I'm about to spend Passover with my family and friends. My family is very much aligned with my political views, but has decided to tune out the news completely since Trump was inaugurated. How do you recommend talking with people like this about the dangers of tuning out? What advice do you have to encourage people to re-engage and join the fight?
That's a really good question. And I think the most important thing is that we're seeing how this stuff is impacting us. And so we don't have the luxury right now of being able to tune out because we view politics as just some nebulous conversation about, the tax code or states' rights or whatever it is. I mean, this stuff is impacting actual people. If you've looked at your 401k, you recognize that it's impacting actual people. If you've looked at the price of items, especially between now and the next couple of weeks here, we're going to see that things are going to start to get more expensive. I'm sure that there are folks in your families who rely on Medicaid. There are folks who rely on food stamps or SNAP benefits. There are folks who rely on Social Security, and yet we're seeing the Republicans move forward with their efforts to eliminate $880 billion from Medicaid, eliminate $230 billion from food stamps, and they're firing people who work in the Social Security Administration who are responsible for resolving issues that people might encounter in an effort to kind of gut it from the inside so that they can ultimately give themselves a pretense to try and privatize it. But all of this stuff really touches home. And so we're not in a world anymore where we can just kind of rest on our laurels and say, oh, I'm not interested in politics. It doesn't impact me, because the fact is that it's gonna touch virtually everyone now, whether it's just the price of everyday goods or whether it's more significant factors like relying on the government for healthcare or earned benefits that we've paid into our entire lives. And so I would take it from that approach. And it doesn't have to be, proselytizing or overbearing, but just acknowledging that, if somebody in your family does rely on Medicaid, does rely on Social Security, does rely on SNAP benefits, does rely on education funding or any type of NIH or CDC examples, then I think that's a way to really reach people on a level that kind of transcends just the usual politics and actually touches them in their real life.
Great. Okay. Well, one idea for Passover conversation here is our next question. Trump has threatened to run for a third term multiple times, and he has even stated he's serious, and he thinks he has a way. Should we be taking this clearly unconstitutional threat seriously? And how do you recommend communicating on this issue?
I take it seriously. I think we would be foolish to ignore his threats just because he says them out in broad daylight. He's under this mistaken notion that if you commit crimes or threaten to commit crimes in broad daylight and not under the cloak of darkness, that somehow makes it okay. Like if it doesn't seem sneaky, that somehow it's not. It's blatantly, nakedly unconstitutional, and yet the fact that he's saying it, I think it's easy for some folks to say, oh well, he's just trying to distract you, and it may very well be a distraction, but I think at the same time he's also being deadly serious, and so I think it's the same deal. I mean, look, in terms of being able to communicate this, one, this is foundational. And so if you want to have a country where whatever side of the aisle you're on, that you're still able to have some say and advocate for your stance on the issues, that requires a functioning democracy, which means that we can't have an autocrat in office. And so this is something that whether you are a Republican, and those people like to fashion themselves strict constitutionalists, doesn't get clearer than the fact that you can't serve more than 2 terms in office. And of course, if you're on the left or an independent, I think that the argument is even easier in terms of why we shouldn't have somebody violate the Constitution in deference to a third term. But any way you cut it, I do think that we take this seriously. And with that said, I am not, I'm focused on taking it seriously. I'm not losing sleep over it right now because I do know that there are people who are acutely aware of what's happening, both on the left and the right, who are diametrically opposed to this. So I think that we toe the line between not ignoring what's happening, not allowing ourselves to be caught off guard, but at the same time recognizing the immediate fights that are right in front of us, but keeping that kind of in our back pocket.
Okay, on the note of not losing sleep, it's a good theme. Another question from one of our members. The Trump administration is instilling fear to stop people from speaking out. They've sued media outlets, as you noted. They've sued law firms, essentially extorted big law firms
Yeah.
who don't fall in line with their agenda. They have detained and they're threatening to deport legal residents for speaking out in views that even we disagree with, but people do have the right to make their views known. Should we be fearing for our personal safety as we proudly and defiantly speak out against this administration? And are you fearful, as you do so with such a huge audience, about potential retaliation?
The ironic part is that prior to Trump actually taking office, I was, and I had a lot of conversations, and I even had conversations with criminal defense attorneys about what my legal exposure could be in the face of an administration that is completely lawless and that would wield the federal government as a cudgel against their political opponents for speaking out. Um, I've actually gotten to the point where I'm not now, and I don't think that you should be either. And I think that you should use your voice in whatever avenue you can to demand that any of the people or entities or companies that Trump targets that they stand up. Because I think it's actually, if you take the law firm example, there was Paul Weiss, right? Paul Weiss capitulates, and all of a sudden Trump has this idea that, okay, now I'm winning, now I can do this more, and it emboldens him to continue barreling ahead, and that makes everybody less safe. And so they earned themselves a lot of scorn and derision as the result of that. And I think that's good. And I think we need to do more of that. And we need to make sure that people know that you may be worried about the political consequences of not kowtowing to Trump, but we need to make the political consequences of kowtowing to Trump even worse for these people who embolden him to think that he can use the levers of the federal government to exact revenge from his political opponents. And so I'm not afraid. I don't think anybody else should be afraid. I think we should speak out as loudly and clearly as we possibly can to make sure that We punish the people who embolden Trump into thinking that he can be as lawless as possible, and to reward the people who stand up to him. I mean, I know Mark Elias is a friend of JDCA, and when Trump called out Mark Elias and ELG, Elias Law Group, his firm, from behind the presidential seal, he was like, I will never back down. I will never capitulate to this administration. So long as I have breath in my body, I will continue to fight. And that gives a permission structure for other law firms and other people to know that we've got fighters on our side and that we are going to win this if we have a big enough audience to back him up and to back up everybody who's being targeted by this administration. So I think that that's the tack we need to take, and we need to advance here as fearlessly as possible.
I agree. And it's perhaps quite timely as well as we approach Passover, because we're of course celebrating liberation. Liberation comes after resistance in our pursuit of freedom, and in many ways, we're resisting. We are working toward that liberation from
Not
our
not to be
tyrants.
confused with Liberation Day, which I think
Oh, well, he
distinction.
misused the term, so there we
Yeah.
have it. Um, so to close, Brian, this is a question that I ask most people who join us, but I'm particularly interested in your answer because we've talked about so many issues. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us about what gives you hope. What sustains you in doing this work? And for those who listen to Brian's podcast, it's not just that the reach is growing, it's that the content is also growing. He used to have one guest, now he's at 4 a week. And as you noted, he's in Washington, he's meeting with Democrats all the time. You're just continuing to grow what you're doing, which is really inspiring. But what is driving you? What gives you hope about the future?
What gives me hope is that this would be really the perfect textbook moment for everybody to check out. I mean, it really would. Like what we're seeing here is unlike anything that we've seen in the history of this country, and sadly, it's very similar to what we've seen in other countries where they've descended from liberal democracy into illiberal democracy, or even worse. And so this would be the perfect moment for a lot of people in a country, by the way, that is pretty apolitical, pretty politics apathetic already, to be able to check out. And to my earlier point, the fact that so many people are opting not to, and in fact, not just opting not to, but who have such a desire, such a thirst right now to fight back, is it just, even at a moment where, frankly, I'm exhausted. I know that a lot of people are exhausted, but the fact that people are powering through and still have an openness and a desire to fight, the fact that everybody who's tuning in right now, when things are so grim, so bad, at a moment where we're so far still from the next election cycle, but that people are bought in and looking for a way to fight back. That's what keeps me going. So I see the appetite to be able to push back. I see the appetite to be able to stand up and to do something. I get hundreds of emails per day, and I read them from people who are looking to fight back and stand up, and really who are meeting this moment. And we're going to look back and at a time when we will have defeated Trumpism, and I know that we're going to get to that point, and know that, like, when things could have slid in such an unfortunate direction in this country, that the fact that we have a population here that decided to meet this moment with the urgency that it deserves, and that we're already seeing the beginnings of that right now, that's the thing that keeps me going. So, again, and I know I've repeated this, but I do want to thank everybody for being here and for tuning in, because again, having you all here, staying informed at a moment where it would be so easy to check out, and where things are grim enough that it would almost make sense to do so. That's really the fact that you all are here, the fact that we're all figuring out ways to fight back and get better and have some introspection and speaking up. That's what keeps me going.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks for sharing your insight with us. Thanks for sharing your voice and your views with the world. We're really proud and honored to be partners, and we so appreciate your leadership. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and thank you to the whole team at JDCA and everybody who's tuning in today.
Thank you. And we're going to turn it over to our Chief Program Officer, Bobby Saferstein, to wrap up and tell us where to go from here. Bobby.
Thanks, Halie. And thanks to Brian and each of you for tuning in for today's conversation. If you aren't yet following Brian on YouTube and watching his weekly show, No Lie, with Brian Tyler Cohen, please click on the links in the chat. You don't want to miss it. As we've seen in recent days and as we've heard today, Democrats are making meaningful wins, but it is going to take all of us to keep mobilizing, to keep amplifying our message, and to keep supporting candidates and initiatives in line with our Jewish and democratic values to protect our democracy, our rights, and to take back the House in 2026. To join JDCA in these efforts, here are 4 actions we can all take today. And don't worry if you missed any of them. We will be following up via email with each of these action items. So number 1, please join our efforts to resist Trump's tariffs, protect voting rights, and oppose GOP cuts to critical programs by signing the petitions we have linked in the chat. 2, please make sure you're subscribed to our email list at jewishdems.org to learn about all of our upcoming events, and make sure you're following JDCA and Halie Soifer on all the social media platforms where you're active. This includes Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, Twitter, Substack, TikTok, YouTube. I don't know, the list keeps growing, but please make sure you're following us. And if you're so inclined, please share our posts and help us get our message out there. 3, if you're not yet a JDCA member, please consider becoming one or increasing your membership level to support our work. JDCA members access special benefits such as members-only programs with leading experts and exclusive Q&A opportunities like today. Our next members-only event will be on Wednesday, May 14th at 12 p.m. Eastern with Supreme Court expert and senior editor for Slate Magazine, Dahlia Lithwick. You don't want to miss it, so click on the link and become a member today. And finally, number 4, please mark your calendars for JDCA's virtual week of action on Capitol Hill. JDCA's network of volunteers and supporters will meet with their congressional delegations to advocate for and discuss our policy priorities as Jewish Democrats. All of JDCA's meetings with members of Congress will be virtual and will take place during the week of June 9th. So mark your calendars now. In just a few short days, Jews around the world will gather with friends and family to celebrate Passover, Zman Cherutenu, and retell the story of our liberation and freedom from Egypt and oppression. Interestingly, of the 2 Hebrew words for freedom, the sages of our tradition chose to use cherut, which is freedom to, instead of chofesh, which is freedom from, when referring to Passover, because our freedom isn't guaranteed. Much like with our democracy, and as we've heard today, it's our responsibility to be active participants in ensuring that our rights, freedoms, and protections continue for ourselves and others. So this Passover, we hope you'll ask a 5th question. What am I doing to advocate for our rights, defend our democracy, and safeguard our freedom? We hope you'll do so with JDCA. Thank you for joining us, wishing each of you a Chag Pesach Sameach, a happy Passover, and we'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone.